Right.
It says that we are live on YouTube now.
It's being sent to a third party. Maybe that's I don't know who that is. That my husband? I'm not sure. Yeah.
No, ma'am. It's live for YouTube. So YouTube is the third party.
Okay, fine. Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chandani Jaswal. I'm a co-team member here at Karma, the Heritage Exploration Initiative. We are back with another YouTube special lecture, and this one's really very special indeed because it's a conversation which by Professor Francis X. Clooney and Professor Nilima Chitkopekar. And the title of the lecture is The Hindu-Christian Encounter, a Model for the 21st Century Interreligious Learning. We're very, very honored, Professor Clooney, to have you for the lecture tonight with us, and Professor Chitkopekar for accepting our invitation to moderate the session today. A quick, even though I have about 30 seconds to introduce our scholars, but because of the illuminous lecture life that they had and the career that they had, I may go beyond my 30 seconds and it may take me 2 minutes. So very quickly, an introduction to our esteemed speaker and moderator. Dr. Francis X. Clooney joined the Harvard Divinity School faculty in 2005, where he is the Parkman Professor of Divinity and Professor of Comparative Theology. Professor Clooney's primary areas of Indological scholarship are theological commentarial writings in Sanskrit and Tamil traditions of Hindu India. He's also a leading figure globally in the developing field of comparative theology, a discipline distinguished by attentiveness to the dynamics of theological learning, deepened through the study of traditions other than one's own. Professor Clooney has also written on the Jesuit missionary tradition, particularly in India, on the early Jesuit Pan-Asian discourse on reincarnation, and on the dynamics of dialogue and interreligious learning in the contemporary world. Professor Clooney is the author of several articles and books, including Thinking Ritually, Retrieving the Purva Mimamsa of Jaimini, Theology and After Vedanta, An Experiment in Comparative Theology, Beyond Compare, St. Francis de Sales and Sri Vedanta Desika on Loving Surrender to God, The Truth, the Way, the Life, the Christian Missionary on the Three Holy Mantras of Srinivasa Hindus, and His Hiding Place is Darkness, a Hindu Catholic theopoetics of divine absence. In July 2010, Professor Clooney was elected as a Fellow of the British Academy and has served as Professorial Research Fellow at the Australian Catholic University. His most recent honorary doctorates include one awarded by the University Scranton in September 2023 and one awarded by Lemeon College in May 2024. During 2022 to 2023, Professor Clooney was the president of the Catholic Theological Society of America. Professor Clooney is also a Roman Catholic priest and has been a member of the Society of Jesus for 55 years. He serves regularly in Catholic parish on weekends. We're indeed very, very honored, sir, to have you tonight with us for this lecture.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A brief introduction to our extremely illustrious moderator, Professor Nilima Chitkopekar, who has recently retired from the Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi, where she taught history for over 40 years. Professor Chitkopekar specializes in ancient Indian history, religious traditions, and gender in early India, with a focus on Shaivism and goddess cults. Her PhD explores the evolution of Shaivism in Madhya Pradesh between 550 to 1200 Common Era. A distinguished scholar, Professor Chitkopekar has been a visiting fellow at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and a recipient of the Charles Wallace India Research Award. She has also represented South Asia in international academic programs, including the USIS Summer Institute at Boston College. Her publications include several critically acclaimed books, such as Shakti, an exploration of the divine feminine, Expressing the Goddess on the Trail of the Yoginis, The Reluctant Family Man, Shiva in Everyday Life, and Rudra, the Idea of Shiva. Her work combines historical analysis with textual archaeological studies, making significant contributions to the understanding of Indian religious traditions. This is the title, like I said, of the lecture, and the conversation tonight is The Hindu-Christian Encounter, a Model for the 21st Century Interreligious Learning. Professor Francis X. Clooney, in conversation with Professor Nilima Chidgopikar. A few housekeeping rules before I hand it over to our speaker. We would have the lecture for 30 to 35 minutes, which would be followed by a conversation/Q&A session by Professor Chidgopikar. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, which would be read out by Professor Chidgopikar to Professor Clooney post her conversation with Sir. Without further ado, for the moment we've been waiting for, I now hand it over to Professor Clooney for the lecture. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. So I am honored to be part of this conversation today. Carwan is new to me, but I learned that it's a very vigorous, interesting organization. So I'm happy to be here today and happy to be with my old friend, Professor Nilima Chidgopikar. We go back at least 30 years at this point. And I was just recently the respondent for a book event here at Harvard on the Birthing the Goddess. And Professor Chidgopikar has an article in the book. It's a wonderful book. And the only regret we had that Nilima could not be present at Harvard for that event. But so we keep in touch, and I'm happy to have you, Nilima, presiding over the event today. So I think without further ado, I'll just get into my presentation. And I will, in a moment, share my screen and put up on the screen, page by page, notes for my presentation. And if anyone would like this afterwards, Chandani, you could give it to anyone who asks you for copies of it. It's just outlined. It's nothing totally written. But let me see if I can find it here. And here we are. So there we are. I was a bit younger there. But nonetheless, this is the event that we're celebrating today. So let me turn then to my topic. As the topic is put, Hindu-Christian encounter, a model for 21st century interreligious learning. And I thought it might be good to begin with just a clarification on what interreligious learning is, in my view. Because in our world today, where pluralism is taken for granted, where people of many different religious traditions are crossing paths all the time in any big city, there's constantly people rubbing shoulders, you might say. But I'm also thinking that there has to be some kind of an intentional engagement where people want to be in dialogue with people of other faith traditions. So I give you some bullet points, some points here. Interreligious learning as encounter as dialogue. And as I just said, much of this happens in life. We all live in mixed environments. There may be Hindus or Muslims or Christians or Buddhists or others in our neighborhood, our place of work. Our children may be going to schools with people of other faith traditions. And this perhaps is the simplest and most important part of interreligious learning as encounter and dialogue, that we can't avoid it. It's part of life today. The very idea that one could have an entirely Christian country or an entirely Hindu country or entirely Buddhist country isn't going to work. And therefore, we learn from life. We learn from paying attention, by having friendships and so on. Also in work together, in service and commitment to justice. And by this, I mean simply that we have common causes. So think of the environmental crisis in many of our cities and countries today. When the river is polluted, that's not a Hindu problem or a Muslim problem or a Christian problem, it's our problem. When the air is polluted, that's everybody's problem. When there is danger on the streets, too much crime in the United States, gun violence and so on, that's everybody's problem. So working together can be a wonderful way for people to get to know each other religiously. If somebody is helping the poor, the migrants, there may be a Christian reason for helping the poor and a Hindu reason, a Buddhist reason, Muslim reason, and so on. But basically, we're all together. We're all working together for something that is good. There are also, and we often see photo ops of this, official gatherings. So there you might see a bishop of the Catholic Church, an imam, an acharya or swami sitting together, having a discussion about, at the top level, about how our communities are relating to one another. About 25 years ago, Pope John Paul called a meeting in Assisi in Italy, the home of Francis of Assisi, and he invited leaders of all different religions to come together to talk to one another. This is important but it's only part of the dialogue, because dialogue is not simply leaders talking to one another, but all people talking to one another. Study and intellectual exchange. And this, I think, is very important. You'll see in the sequel, in what I say, is that not only do we have to be respectful and polite toward other people's religions, we also have to study other people's religions. We also have to be willing to learn from them, to receive questions from them, to pose questions back and forth, and to be intellectually informed about what our neighbors believe. I find so much in life, there are stereotypes. We don't really know or understand what, let's say, people of another faith tradition believe. We stereotype them, and therefore we have to be able to learn and study each other's traditions. And then finally, but not least important, very important, what I put shared prayer and spiritual learning, sharing. And this, I mean that there has to be, I think, a spiritual dimension. So we can work together, we can be together at gatherings, we can study, but there should be some kind of a spiritual gathering where we spiritually pray together, meditate together, exchange and learn from one another, perhaps going to each other's houses of worship, the temple or the church or the mosque, back and forth is so important. The final thing I'll say from this page, interreligious encounter has to be thought of as a holistic, multi-level, personal, and communal engagement. Namely, all the things in the preceding point are going on all the time. It can't be dialogue is one thing, encounter is one thing, but it happens on many levels. And then I also point out that there are different relationships, different histories in different parts of the world. That it's hard to say that, let's say in Delhi, there might be a certain way that Hindus and Christians relate, but where I am in Boston, Massachusetts, USA, it might come out differently. Or if we were in South Africa, it would be in a different way again. That we have to be attentive to where we are and what our histories and our place is. So that's my first page. Second page, I would say that I focus on the Hindu-Christian encounter, which I know a lot about. As I'll say in a moment, I first went to South Asia in 1973, so a very long time ago. And since then, I've been involved in some kind of Catholic Hindu learning, Christian Hindu learning for a very long time. I am a Roman Catholic, and therefore, although the title says Hindu Christian, I'll be talking about Catholic and Hindu. And I think we just admit that there are different kinds of Catholics, just Christians, just like there are different kinds of Hindus, and we can all learn from one another. I would also point out that Hindu-Christian, Hindu-Catholic encounter is not something new. So my B number, in Indian history, both ancient relationships, going back by tradition even to the time of the apostles of Jesus, the story that Thomas the Apostle came to India in the 1st century, and then all the way up to 1498 when the Portuguese came. And the Portuguese came and established a trading base, and then I think, unfortunately, military presence, and began to colonize parts of India. But it would be a mistake to think that the Christian-Hindu encounter began in 1498. It actually goes back 1,500 years before that, and has been taking place elsewhere in related countries like Sri Lanka, Nepal, South Africa, and for a good long time now in London, in the United States, and other parts of the world. So although naturally we focus on South Asia and India, we can also think more broadly. The encounter involves foreigners arriving in India, missionaries and colonizers. And again, that's mixed in with imperial power, with military presence and so on, which is not good. But there's more to it than that, given the fact that Christianity in India, as I said, is 2,000 years old, perhaps, and that Indian Christians are, I think, Indian. They're not foreigners. They belong there and have been there a very long time, so I think. And of course, the Hindu religious traditions go back far, far longer, and that there are many, many beautiful traditions of Hinduism that go back a very long time to the Rig Veda and before the Rig Veda. so many different forms of worship, different gods and goddesses, all kinds of different manifestations that are grouped somewhat clumsily under the word Hindu. And I think, therefore, both Christians and Hindus have to respect that the two traditions are quite old and that have been in contact for a long time. I also mentioned that although it is only at most 2,000 years that Indian Christians, that there have been Indian Christians, for a long time, they have been engaging the majority Hindu and Muslim populations of India. And I think for the most part, although news is usually bad news, and we can talk about the hostility between this Christian group and that Hindu group and so on like that on times, for the most time, it seems that in South Asia, there has been religious respect and religious harmony. And that people who are Christian or Hindu or Muslim or Sikh or Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, other traditions have basically been good neighbors and lived in harmony. That doesn't pretend that everything has always been nice, but nonetheless that there's a lot of good news to share that we keep in place. The last point here, I've sort of said already, that there are many different kinds of Christians. Some Christians are very evangelical, some Christians are very liberal and progressive, some Christians are very orthodox, different kinds of Christians. And as I said, I'm speaking from a Roman Catholic position. But let's say in Kerala, in South India, the Syro-Malabar Church, the Syro-Malankar Church are very old, and the general group called the Thomas Christians, the Mar Thoma churches and so on, are very old. And of course, as I just said, there are Vaishnava Hindus, Shaiva Hindus, Tantrika Hindus, Advaitins, different Sampradayas, different Margas. All of these are together, and we have to be attentive that there's no single dialogue or encounter between Hindu and Christian, but many different kinds. To move to my next page, I then can get personal and say that I have had a long personal experience of learning from Hindu traditions, which is really what makes me optimistic about the title today, that the Hindu-Catholic, Hindu-Christian relationship can be a model for interreligious learning. So I went to Kathmandu after my BA studies in 1973. I was teaching in a missionary school, St. Xavier's School in Kathmandu Valley. And for 2 wonderful years, I was teaching students there at the school, a boarding school. And all the boys I taught were Hindu and Buddhist. It was a Christian run school by Catholic fathers, Jesuits, but all the boys and most of the staff were Hindu and Buddhist. And for me as a young man, it was an eye-opening experience, learning interreligiously at that time. I mentioned here several moments that really touched me in my first months there. Let's say in September or October 1973, I went to the Dakshin Kali temple. I'm sure many of you listening have been there, just south of the Kathmandu Valley. And some of the workers from the school went out and they asked me to come with them. And I went to the Dakshin Kali temple on a Tuesday morning, and it was quite new to me. It was the first real temple I really paid attention to in my short time there. And when I got to the temple, I saw that on Tuesday, like on Saturday, there was animal sacrifice. And people were lined up, maybe 15, 20 people, it was not so crowded, with a chicken or a goat even, and there was sacrifice to the goddess. And I think at that point, I could have taken 2 paths. One path would have said, I disapprove. I'm a Western Christian. I don't approve of animal sacrifice. This is a bad thing. But I think God's blessing was upon me that I said, this is very powerful. Most Hindu traditions do not have animal sacrifice, of course, but that I saw the piety of the people. I saw the faith and devotion. Even the priest seemed to be a holy man. And that this for me was impressive to learn something different from people of a different religious tradition. So worship of Kali was not what I grew up with in New York City, but it was something I learned from in this context. I also, around the same time, started reading, and the first book I really loved was Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore. And many of you know this book perhaps by heart. A beautiful book in its English translation by Tagore himself, and also the Bengali versions that also are accompanying it. But such lovely poetry, such spiritual poetry that I found didn't have to be justified as being Hindu poetry or Bengali poetry or Christian poetry. No, it was poetry that speaks to all people. And I think that opened my heart and mind that I could learn from the traditions of India. Then I read the Bhagavad Gita. Then I read other text stories of the Buddha. I went on and studied Shankara, Ramanuja, Hindu ritual, and so on. But it kind of began with this confidence of learning from Gitanjali as a starting point. My E there, I mentioned that Purva Mimamsa tradition, ritual, darshana, Shankara, Ramanuja Vedanta, endlessly fascinating. And even today, some 50 years later, I still study these traditions. And then Ramakrishna. I think it was first in the Kathmandu Valley, about 1974 perhaps, that I learned about Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, Swami Vivekananda, and how these were people of spiritual depth and openness who preached kind of a universal harmony. And that Ramakrishna was a great mystic. He too was a Kali worshiper. And I think that kind of showed me the holiness of individuals in Hindu tradition. And I think many Hindus over the years have been attracted to holy Christian figures, such as I mentioned before, Francis of Assisi, Mother Teresa, other figures who show the holiness. I was learning the holiness, and I think many of the Hindus and Buddhists I knew in Kathmandu could also recognize holy people of Christian tradition. I recently published a memoir, Hindu and Catholic Priest and Scholar, a love story. And it was an effort that came out last summer, 2024, from Bloomsbury, T&T Clark. And it was really meant to show how Hinduism has been part of my life, even though I'm a Catholic, even though I'm a Catholic priest, I'm a professor at a university, Harvard University, but all of this fits together in my book. I'll just show you the cover of the book. And I'm much younger in the picture here. This was 1974, up in the hills of Nepal, with two workers from our school. And I picked the title of the book in order to illustrate the complexity that Hindu and Catholic come together in my life. I'm also a professor, but I'm also a priest in the parish, and that it's love that holds it all together. For me, it's been a lifelong love story, going back and forth between the two traditions, learning in many different ways. And in the book, I try to talk about the things I just mentioned here, but then also give further examples and story about my growing up and so on. And then I think any of us can do this as part of our lives, to be able to talk from our personal stories about how we have learned from people of other faith traditions. I think today, particularly everyone listening here, would be well disposed to say we're better off if we learn interreligiously from other traditions, not because our own tradition is lacking something, but because there's more. There's always more of the divine, more of God we learn from other traditions as well. More generally, I think, why do Hindu and Catholic fit together? And I call them here multimedia religions. And what I mean by this is that it's not just a matter of comparing books to one another or ideas about this or that, which are important, but that there's a multi-level, multimedia way that people are Hindu and Catholic. The Hindu and Catholic traditions are so appealing to the senses. In a Catholic church and a Hindu temple, there is so much to see, to hear, to smell, to taste, to touch. All the senses come alive physically, and I think spiritually in these places of worship. They're not empty, they're not spare, but they're full of life and full of imagery. Images, mortis, sounds and smells. I once was in Rome for a conference, and there were some Hindu members of the delegation that were at the conference. And one day we all went over to St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope's church in St. Peter's Square. And what was striking was that the Hindus in the group were loved to be in St. Peter's Basilica because it was multimedia. There was so much to see and smell and taste and touch. And for me personally, going not only to Dakshin Kali, but going to Sri Rangam, going to Tirupati several times, going to Dakshineshwar, temples in other parts of India, in the United States. It's always been, in some ways, like feeling I'm at home, because I think there's a certain kind of correspondence between Catholic and Hindu sensitivity, and plenty of room given to the imagination. That there are many ways in which Hindus and Catholics are taught in our prayer, our meditation, to use our imagination, to see what God looks like, what the goddess looks like, and to open our minds and imagine what would it be if I was talking to the goddess, if I was talking to Jesus Christ. How does this work? I think we're always having imagination. Both Catholics and Hindus, and many others, of course, have rituals, pujas, what we call sacraments, where things are offered at the altar and people share them, the communion service, for instance. And I think this is important because some people think religion is better if there's no ritual, if there's only personal faith. But I think both Hindus and Catholics appreciate, no, there's lots of ritual, lots of puja, lots of worship together, people going to holy places day after day, the priest maybe chanting some prayers, and so on, that we appreciate doing things together physically, ritually, again and again throughout the year. And we have sacred calendars too. But we also believe, I think, ritual is not enough, puja is not enough. Spiritual practices toward realization, that there are so many ways in which both Catholics and Hindus, and again, other people of other faiths, realize that we're all on the spiritual path. We're all heading towards some kind of enlightenment, some kind of liberation. We Catholics would say toward union with God. And I think it's important to realize that through yoga, through meditation, through asceticism, we're really all on pilgrimage. We're all trying to find the divine in our own way, and we're often doing it together. So we Christians are in the season of Lent now. There are special observances in the weeks of Lent, fasting and so on, that lead up to Easter. And I know recently there was the Kumbh Mela in India, the largest religious gathering in the world, I guess. And so many people went there for spiritual reasons. And our sisters and brothers who are Muslim are celebrating Ramadan now. And in the sense that you have to practice your religion, you have to be on the pathway. If you really want to understand your own religion or somebody else's, you have to see what they're doing. And then the experiences of saintly and ordinary people that I mentioned before. You can think of great saints like Francis of Assisi, Mahatma Gandhi, maybe Mother Teresa, Ramana Maharshi, Ramakrishna, and so on. But the holiness of ordinary people. And I think if you agree with me, ordinary life in school or at the church or elsewhere, I've met many ordinary people who are actually great saints and have a great sense of holiness. And I think we agree on this. And therefore, we're not elitist. We don't just want to talk to the people on top, but we realize that all people have God within them, and we learn from one another. There are many different levels on which the Hindu-Catholic relationship can work out. And this, again, I'm showing simply because I think we realize all of this can relate to other religions too. Hindu-Catholic relation is not one thing, it's maybe 10 things, 20 things or more. So again, we're neighbors, we're friends, we have hierarchies. There are acharyas and swamis, there are sampradayas, there's a priest and bishops, cardinals of the Catholic Church, there are imams, there are rabbis. And I think we just realize that in the Hindu and Catholic tradition, having a hierarchy and having leadership is not a bad thing. That although we're all on our own spiritual path, nonetheless, we can learn by having a community, an institution of some sort. In our rituals, some rituals are open to everyone and others are not so open. So many Roman Catholics are uncomfortable if people who are not Catholic receive Holy Communion, body and blood of Christ. And while I've been welcomed in almost all Hindu temples I've gone to, there are some Hindu temples that have signs saying Hindu only. And I think we need to respect the limits that each other put. This is a limit, that's a limit, and therefore that's the faith tradition, and we shouldn't be upset if people have limits on how much people can have access, because we both do this. We have sacred words, we have scriptures, holy books that often are recited. We hear them, maybe we memorize parts of them. Mysticism is a personal experience, but it's also spoken. Great mystics in Hindu and Catholic tradition put their experience into words, and the words become books, and then people study the book and then hopefully have some of the same experience. And there are great intellectual systems, the darshanas, the Vedanta, Mimamsa, Yoga, Sankhya, Vaisheshika, and Nyaya, and the schools of Catholic theology, scholasticism, school of Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, John Calvin, Martin Luther, other Christian thinkers who write big books. And I think when we think of encounter, we really should do each other the courtesy of respecting each other's intellectual, philosophical, theological traditions. That we are simple people, we try to be simple, but we also have great learning in our traditions. And then the courtesy of saying, some of us who are Christian will study Hindu books, and I hope some Hindus will say, we'll study the Christian books, and we'll go deeper in our access to one another. All of this, I should say, is also needs to be tested by realism. The messy reality is of politics, economics, and social pressures. And I've been speaking very much of the harmony between our traditions, but we know that there are unpleasant scenes in the past. Back in the colonial era, there are times when minorities have been terrorized, when some people have taken violence into their hands to attack people they believe shouldn't be in a certain place. And all our traditions, I think, if they're old in particular, have moments when we wish people had acted better, had acted according to the faith. And I think there's nothing to be gained in interreligious encounter if I come and say there's nothing imperfect or sinful in my tradition, but that we have our problems, and I am willing still to learn from you and also regret things that went wrong along the way. And I think if everyone in every tradition says this, we've made mistakes along the way, then we can get along better. And again, all of this is played out in the places where we live, be it in Delhi, let's say, or Boston, where I am, or wherever we are. It works out in different places, how Hindu, Catholic relate, Christian, Hindu relate. And I think we just have to pay attention to where we are at a certain time. We do have differences, and I just list a few of them here that can be talked about endlessly, really. Many Christians believe in one God, as do Muslims and Jews. Christians have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You might say as the ways in which the one God is three. That's a great mystery, but nonetheless, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God. And although many Hindus, my experience, believe in the one true reality, Atman, Brahman, or Maheshwara, the Supreme Lord, there often seem to be many, many different deities in temples, in different places. And that could be a point of difference between the Christian and the Hindu. And I think, but it needn't be something to fight about. Personal and transpersonal ultimate reality. So Christians definitely believe God is a person, and that talking to God can be quite profitable, beneficial. And I know many Hindus, of course, believe in praying to the goddess, praying to Shiva, praying to Krishna, Rama, Sita, and so on. But there's also a level of Brahman as the ultimate Satchitananda, where you become this reality, you don't really pray to it, as far as I understand. And that can be a difference. Self and body in different relationships. So it's very much a Christian belief that we live, we are partly physical beings and partly spiritual beings, and that we belong body and soul as one person. Whereas you read in texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the body is like a coat or a shirt. You put it on, when it gets old, you put it off and you put on another one. And that the Atman can exist perfectly without the body. And for most Christians, being in a body is part of who we are. And even in heaven, we will have a bodily reality with God. So that's a difference. One birth, many births follow from the same. It's a Christian belief of almost all Christians, I'd say 99%, that we're born into the world once. And I know for many Hindus and Buddhists, coming into the world more than once is taken for granted. And I think this is not something to fight about in the 21st century, but something to agree on, to agree to talk to one another about. What does it mean to be born once only? What does it mean to be born many times over is something we can believe. Learn from one another as we believe. Jesus is the one savior, or Jesus is a great teacher. And I think many Hindus I know are happier with the second than the first. So is Jesus the only savior for all people? Many Christians will believe that. But I think we all can agree that Jesus is a great teacher, a wise person who came in compassion to help many people. Hindu traditions have goddesses, obviously. Many goddesses, I find them very interesting. And in the Catholic tradition, the Virgin Mary is like the supreme woman figure, Mother Mary. And this could be a similarity or a difference too. And the reason I put these differences up on the screen is simply to point out that to have an interreligious encounter, to have Hindus and Christians, Hindus and Catholics talking to one another, we don't have to agree 100%, but we can actually disagree on certain things and still learn from one another. And these are just examples where there might be some disagreement. I've done a number of books related to Hindu and Christian. I point out two of them here. Hindu God, Christian God, How Reason Helps Break Down the Boundaries Between Religions. This came out in 2001, Oxford University Press. And the point was to say that many of the Christian beliefs are similar to Hindu beliefs about the nature of God, God in the world, avatar, incarnation, revelation, Shruti, and that if Christians are serious about learning from God, about God, then Christians should be serious about learning from Hindu tradition. It seems to me crazy to say I'll only learn about God from my own tradition, because in fact, both our traditions teach us some of the same deep realities. And the parallel book that goes with it, Divine Mother, Blessed Mother, Hindu Goddesses, and the Virgin Mary. And I make clear in the book, I don't think that Hindu goddesses and Mary are the same. There are differences. And I don't think Mary is a goddess. That's a Catholic tradition, that she's not a goddess. But she's kind of, as I said a moment ago, the supreme figure of Catholic tradition as a woman. And I think we Christians can learn a lot from studying, Sri Lakshmi, Mahadevi, Sita, other goddesses, Kali, and that looking back and forth at Mary and goddesses can actually be an eye-opening experience. And that although there are differences, this is nothing to fight about, but rather we can learn from one another. And I try to talk about this in this book from 20 years ago, 2005. And I'm running out of time, I think, but I just want to point out several of my courses. Krishna and Christ, Hindu Goddesses and the Virgin Mary. So every once in a while, I teach a course called Krishna and Christ, Does It Matter? On the history, theology, devotion, and importance of a comparison. And the whole course is dedicated to going back and forth between Christian belief in Jesus and Hindu belief in Krishna, in text, in practice, some art, some music, some stories, the Gospels, Bhagavata Purana, Bhagavad Gita, and so on like that. Back and forth saying, if you look at Christ alone, that's wonderful. If you look at Krishna alone, that's wonderful. If you look at them together, it's even more wonderful. And that, again, is not a competition anymore, I think. Shouldn't be, but rather we can learn back and forth. And therefore, when I talk about Hindu Christian, Hindu Catholic understanding, I think it works out in the classrooms where I teach as well. Another course related to it, more narrow, the Bhagavad Gita. I'm teaching a course right now on the Bhagavad Gita, and I'd say maybe half my students are Christian and maybe 40% are Hindu in the class. And the Gita is a wonderful text. I think it's for everybody in different ways. But to learn from the Gita as a Hindu, as a Christian, as a person of other faith traditions can be wonderful. And there's no reason, I would say, why a Christian, let's say, who takes seriously the Gita can't teach it. just as there's no reason why a Hindu who takes the gospel serious couldn't teach the gospels. I think you don't have to be in the tradition to teach it. That's what I think. We can talk about that. And then the course related to the book, Hindu Goddesses and the Virgin Mary, what do they mean today, is a course I'm also teaching right now. And we go back and forth between Mary texts, goddess texts, back and forth. So these things happen in practice, and I think students appreciate these courses and learn from them along the way. So to conclude, what I'm saying is that the Hindu-Catholic encounter can offer wisdom for wider interreligious learning that is our common future. We live in a world that's not going to be unreligious or no longer interreligious, but we'll learn from one another, and that the Hindu-Catholic encounter shows us a way to do this in all the encounters of the 21st century. I'll go quickly on this because I think I've said most of it. We have to learn from history. We have to be honest and repentant. We have to beg forgiveness for things that went wrong. We have to stop attacking one another. We have to put the colonial era behind us and say we don't believe in colonialism. We don't believe in a dominant capitalism either, but rather we want people to live prosperous, happy lives, and we respect one another. Majorities respecting minorities, minorities respecting majorities, and trying to live together. And all these dialogues I mentioned at the beginning, we live together, we're neighbors and friends, we work together for justice, we meet together officially, we study each other's traditions, and we pray together. We meditate, we do yoga together. All these things are possible. That can apply to any tradition, I think. Study is important, learn from other traditions, actually read the books of those traditions, have sympathy, empathy, intellectual and spiritual, and be thinking ahead. Again, these relationships are complicated. They're spiritual, religious, they happen on many levels. They happen each place we live, but they're also global. And then we have much in common, Hindus and Catholics and people of other faiths, in a world where there's secularism, capitalism, fundamentalism, violence, extremism, and so on, and that people of good faith need to work together to make the world safe for all people in the world. So I think with that, I am finished, and I will stop there. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Yeah.
Go
Thank
ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Clooney, for this very, very enlightening talk. Questions have already started to pour in, and I've posted those for Professor Chitakopika's review in the chat box. And as and when the questions come, I'll keep posting them, ma'am. Please share your reflections and your insights into Professor Clooney's very, very enlightening lecture.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Clooney. It was, I would say, more than anything else, a very kind presentation, and it's something I enjoyed thoroughly because, the kind of amount of books, maybe 25 books that Francis Clooney has written, he was able to bring the sar, he was able to bring the essence of what he's wanted to say in many of his books. Many of them are deeply philosophical and even difficult for me to understand when he talks about, Vedanta, but, Vishishta Vedanta, this and that. But when he's talked about, the comparative, the goddess, and talked about different verses like the Saundarya Lahari in that wonderful book, where we've already got one question regarding that, or when he's talked about the male gods or the female divinities, or when he's written this wonderful book, which he told me once in a private conversation that it was for his parents, Hindu Wisdom for All God's Children. He's only talked about Hinduism, and with so much of empathy and understanding, never a moment. This is something many of us cannot even fathom, how you can write with not even a note of condescension or rivalry or anything. I mean, he just writes because he loves to look at another religion, in his case, Hinduism. He knows Christianity so well, but he loves Hinduism. He loves to see if there can be a parallel, if there can be between Christianity, Roman Catholicism, and Hinduism. And very often, because he's come often to my college, which is a Catholic, Jesus and Mary Colleges, Catholic institution, and he's come in very often. He's touched the students, Hindus and Christians, so much because they love to hear that somebody actually can do this kind of work. And though Professor Clooney says that we all should do it. I mean, he's very erudite. He's a polyglot. Everybody can't do that. Everybody can't. You can at the most attempt to read books, like read the Bible, read some other books, listen to the Gospels. You can do that much. But the amount of time and energy and intellectual expanse that you need to get to the level where he is unfathomable. It's just unbelievable because he knows all the languages as well. So, we can try to do that. He's very often told me, why don't you become a comparativist? I always feel that I will fall short because I don't know Latin. I don't know so much. I have to live Christianity the way I've had to live Hinduism in order to be anywhere an expert. But don't let that put you down. Everyone is capable of reading, like Professor Clooney said, pick up the books, go to the churches, go to the temples, go to visit each other as neighbors. And more than any other time in the world, we need that now, seeing what's happening in the world around us. So today's lecture is so relevant for everybody. I wish more and more people would listen to Frank or listen to his lectures or even read his books, because I just found it was so soothing today to hear this. I just wish that it would translate itself into reality. Frank, don't you think that's what we need to see more?
Thank you. Right? You're very kind. Thank you.
Yes. And so we have one from a person actually whom I know pretty well, Pragya Val. She used to be a student of mine. And Professor Clooney, she has asked, what are the parallels between Mother Mary and the Hindu goddesses?
Okay, that we could go on for an hour, I suppose, about that, but briefly, thank you for the good question.
Yeah.
I think on one level, it's the point that the goddesses are female figures, and Mary is a female figure. And this maybe is more taken for granted in Hindu traditions. Of course, the divine is male and female, and maybe both at times. But in the Jewish, Christian, Muslim traditions of the West, often the divine is seen as either no gender or as a great father figure. And I think where Mary comes into Catholic piety is as this woman figure who's essential to the Christian faith. She's there from the beginning, the very conception of Jesus. And she is there as this woman who reminds us that the most important things of the faith are not simply male. And so that's one, maybe obvious parallel. I think for many of the goddesses, if not all of them, are mother figures. Some can be frightening too, like Kali can be a frightening figure, but ultimately for Ram Prasad, Ramakrishna can be a mother figure. And Mary, of course, is a quintessential mother, and the person who will take without any hesitation people who have sinned, people who've gone astray, just like a mother will take their child back and protect the child. Mary, and I think many of the goddesses, maybe all the goddesses, are protective figures. And it may be, I'm not sure I can say this, but in many Hindu traditions, the goddesses may be easier to talk to, and that they seem more relatable. And that Mary in Catholic tradition, many people have only highest esteem for Jesus, obviously, but they'll talk to Mary, asking Mary to help them in their troubles. So I could go on from there, but I think those are some of the basic points where we could see that looking at Mary in light of goddesses and goddesses alongside Mary would actually be helpful.
Yeah. And in that book, which actually Professor Clooney showed us, this book, you will see that he's used the hymns for Mary and for all the different Hindu goddesses as well, and Tantric goddesses as well. And he's done his translations, and it's beautifully written. So I would say that if anyone wants more details, this is a very good book to buy, Divine Mother, Blessed Mother. So he's in detail given, the similarities that you can see. And it was just so nice to hear, Professor Clooney tell us that, where the smell of incense is concerned, the fragrances, Catholicism has that, the sound Catholicism has, the hymns, the singing, the chorals, all that. And Hindus have that as well. So, and the murtis, and we look at our murtis, we look at our icons and we worship them, and we love them. So he drew so many in his lectures, so many so many, let's say, similarities between Roman Catholicism and Hinduism, which is so wonderful. And I actually have seen this myself, especially in South India, where all households have their own altar, they have their own shrine. And very often I've seen beautiful images of the Virgin Mary and also of Jesus Christ as a baby, or, just as a grown figure. And they have no problem in having an image of Vishnu there, shivling there, and also Christian divinities.
Very much.
So it's very beautiful. It's very beautiful that we can see the religiosity, the deep spiritual feeling that Christianity gives. I mean, we all should go to a church. We all should witness the peace, the quiet, the beauty of a church, and vice versa. I've done it all my life. So I feel that it's something that we all should do, and we would accept much more. But the problem lies is where we don't find similarity in a particular religion with us. Then Frank, what is one to do? And we know that there are such religions.
Yeah, and I tried to indicate that it doesn't mean everything is the same or everything is harmonious.
Yeah.
But in the world today, people seem to be eager to find differences and then to start, being hateful toward the other as a threat or wrong. And I think 90+%, maybe 95+%, we have in common. And therefore not to lose sight of the commonalities just because there are real differences.
Yes.
And we're intelligent people. We should be able to recognize the differences and say, we don't believe the same thing on this or this or this, but on most things, we are so much in common.
That's right.
Seems to be a healthy way.
That's right. We have one more question here from Chandani. Do Catholic scriptures talk about Hinduism? That is their beliefs and their deities. It's an interesting question.
Yeah. If Catholic scriptures means the Bible, then definitely not. There is no mention in the Bible really of Asia per se, except Israel, Palestine is really in West Asia, but going to the east, to India and China and so on, there's nothing there. They're often the local deities. So the Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, they figure in the context of the Bible. And then in the time of Jesus, the Romans, they were not Christian, obviously, or Jewish. So there was knowledge of the deities of the other people who were, sometimes pejoratively called the pagans. And sometimes people have extended that and said, well, look what the Bible says about the Egyptians. That's the same as about the Indians, or the same about the Chinese. But that's actually a mistake, because it's local. There were political tensions, economic tensions, ways in which there are fights going on in ancient times as in modern times about all kinds of issues. And that taking that and saying, therefore, this tells us how to think about Buddhists or Hindus or Taoists doesn't really work. And therefore, I think the Bible doesn't tie us down and say, this is the only way to think. We often ask the very simple question, what would Jesus do? And one of the things we learn in the Gospels about Jesus, he seemed to respect faith wherever he found it. He'll say to people, you have more faith than my own people. And he appreciated the Roman or the Canaanite because of their belief and their faith.
Yes, So we have Shoyendu Ray asking, is there any truth to Jesus's visit to pilgrimage centers in India during the last years?
I think that is often put forward that in the Gospel of Luke, we have mentioned when Jesus was 12 years old, he went to the temple with his parents. Then nothing is said until he was 30 years old. And the speculation has been, why is Jesus such a different person? Why is he so mystical? Why does he have these ability to heal the sick, to raise the dead to life? And there are these traditions of saying, well, he went to India, which would not have been impossible because there was trade back and forth in the Roman Empire, ships going back and forth. There's archaeological evidence that ancient Israel and ancient South India had some contact through coins and poetry and so on like that. So it was possible, but I think there's no proof of this. Nothing is said in the Gospels to indicate that Jesus ever left Palestine, and that his wisdom was maybe from the sacred traditions of the Jewish people, and then from his own prayer life. If he did go to India, I think it would not have been a bad thing. It would have been beautiful that he would go and study with yogis and swamis and so on. But there's no evidence that this took place.
Yeah.
Whereas his first disciple, there's a long tradition I mentioned before that St. Thomas, one of the 12 apostles, did go to India after the death and resurrection of Jesus. That seems to be an old tradition that people still believe, but Jesus going to India, there's no evidence.
Yeah.
There's really no evidence for or against.
It's like maybe it's an oral tradition. That's what it is, basically.
Yeah.
It's an oral tradition. Okay. Yeah. I think I'm Professor Clooney, you do have to go. I don't think there are any further questions right now. Do you have to leave right away, or I know you have
I can
class.
stay a few more minutes if there are any further questions.
No, there aren't. I just wanted to make one observation. It was interesting to me that you said many people who believe in Mary, they prefer to ask her questions or beseech her for favors rather than go to Jesus Christ. And the Sri Vaishnav tradition, everyone is scared of Vishnu. And like people are normally afraid of their father and they go through the mother. So in the Sri Vaishnav tradition, they go through Sri Lakshmi and they pray to her and tell her, please communicate our wishes to your husband because he's so mighty, he's awe-inspiring. So it's interesting to me that you would say that for Mary, that they prayed to her for Jesus, so that Jesus would hear their prayers. That's interesting.
And I think that's one of the reasons that Mary becomes so important in Roman Catholic tradition, also in the Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, the churches of Kerala, because there is this sense of the mother.
That's
and as with Kali becoming a mother figure, or the graciousness of Lakshmi, Sri Lakshmi, all of this seems to make human sense, and that this can be something I could imagine. So Nilima, you're part of this recent book, Birthing the Goddess, and the emergence of the goddess before that. You could all do a book like on these mother figures. Mary is a mother figure, goddesses as mother figures, and the commonality, despite other religious differences, that we actually have certain basic instincts in common.
That's right. Yeah, good suggestion. Yeah, that's really good. Chandi, do you have anything to ask, or do you
Ma'am, I had a question of my own, and we've also just received a question in the chat box.
Oh, I haven't seen it. Okay, let me see. That's it's not here.
Yes, ma'am. I was still typing. It asks, Srijan Chakraborty is asking you if you could please shed some light on the similarities of functional methods of the ideologies behind forming any community or tribe in both traditions.
Oh.
So forming a community or tribe?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me just say this, and then maybe the person can come back and ask again if I don't understand it. I mean, religion can be a tribal identity, and that people can believe strongly, what our ancestors believe, our fathers and mothers, grandparents, and so on. And it can become a tribal matter, like this is what we believe. It forms us as a community, and we're different from the other tribes and other communities. So it can be passed down in family lineages. I'm Irish Catholic. Today is the feast of St. Patrick, who's the great saint of the Irish. And there are certain things that Irish Catholics believe that Italian Catholics don't practice or don't celebrate, or Russian Catholics or Greek Catholics. So there's certain kind of, family traditions, and then tribal groups, both in India and other parts of the world, thousands of years of traditions being passed down. I think what happens, for better or worse, is that many times then the tribal traditions and family traditions get kind of brought into the major big traditions, and sometimes they're suppressed. And this can be very bad, as some of the colonizing powers suppressing native peoples in different parts of the world. But it also can be beautiful because the big traditions change for the better when the wisdom of the local people comes in.
Yes.
So that's a thought that I have. I mean, that's a very sociological question. How do communities form? in
Yeah.
relation to religion, that would
Yeah.
require, I have to think about it more to give a good answer. But I think it's important that we don't just have individuals and don't just have giant religions. We have all these immediate family groups, tribal groups, local groups where people live religiously.
Yes, and they
Ilima, I
can
don't know if you have anything to add on that.
no, they can change existing divinity also to suit their local needs. Like we see the goddess here in Frank's book. She's wearing on the cover. She's wearing on a beautiful sari, and that's taken from Chennai. I think the beach in Chennai, right? There's an image there. So there's a lot of assimilation going on and localization going on. Even with the higher divinities, if we can give that higher divinities, like Mary or Jesus, or you're making them your own, or you're bringing in your own divinity who may be a tribal divinity and bringing him close to Shiva as one of the manifestations of Shiva. Like you have the Ugra forms of Shiva like Bhairav or Bhikshatan Murti, or all those fierce forms of Shiva. They may be belonging Khandoba, they may be belonging to different tribal groups, which are then brought under the fold of Brahmanization and given authenticity and legitimacy. So this constant process is happening in Hinduism. And I would say where Christianity is concerned also, there's at least, where the appearance is concerned, and I'm sure many rituals also, they may have the main rituals there common to everyone. But just like Professor Clooney was saying, he being an Irish Catholic, they'll be different from the Russian Catholic. So that those differences are geographical and contextual and local. And that's always very interesting to study.
Yeah, I think we appreciate this because just take Europe and South Asia. So in South Asia, Sri Lankans and Tamils are not the same as Gujaratis or Nepalis.
Yeah.
The food customs, the music, the clothing, and the worship will be different in different parts of India. And you don't expect people in Bengal and people in Maharashtra to pray the same way exactly.
Yeah.
And the same, the Italians, the Spanish, the Scandinavians, the Irish are different cultures. And depending on where somebody comes from, their Christianity or their Hinduism will differ culturally, ethnically. And that's good because the differences are actually the most interesting part.
Yeah. Yeah. Srijin is also asking, the same person who asked the previous question, what are the differences between functionality of Hinduism and Catholicism? Functionality.
What does that mean? Do we know?
I'm wondering also, what does he mean by that functionality? What role does it play? Does he mean that, or? I don't know. I don't know. I may be wrong. I'm just waiting for him to write.
I mean, one of the things I referred to in my presentation was that these are traditions of practice and spiritual practice. So they're functioning traditions. I'm not sure if he means this.
That's what he means.
But the idea that the traditions, when somebody you ask, are you Catholic? Do you practice your Catholic faith? Do you do the prayer? Do you do the rituals? Do you pray as a Catholic? Do you go to different places? What do you do as a Catholic? And then I think for many Hindus, it's the believing, the devotion, but also the different upasanas, the pujas, karma yoga, raja yoga, all kinds of different ways of practicing. But I'm not sure in the question what functionality means. So I can't say more than that.
Yeah. Andy, you want to take a picture of us, three of us?
Yes, I would.
I would like to have one for my own.
Me too.
It was really very pleasant, Professor Clooney, very pleasant. I found it a very pleasant exchange.
No, thank you. No, it's a very wonderful occasion.
So nice, so much of information, but yet put down at a level that everyone can understand. So that's
good.
Just
well, I hope people listening in enjoyed it. And
yes, I truly hope so.
So if I could please put a question to both of you actually before we leave.
Hi.
Oh, are you running late? I totally understand.
No, go ahead. Yeah, please.
So my question was that we often in common parlance say Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai. And my question was, Isai, what is Isai referring to? Is it Catholicism? Is it Protestants? Or is it Christianity in general? And when did this term Isai come for Christians?
I don't know the answer technically to that, like when. I mean, I think all Christians would like to believe that we are Jesus traditions, and that we all go back to the story of Jesus saying, "Come, follow me, be my disciple." Now, when you look at the Greek Orthodox or the Roman Catholic or the Lutheran or the Quaker and other groups, they seem very different. And the Pope in Rome and the Orthodox Patriarch in Constantinople, Istanbul, are very different. But in some way, the real test of being a Christian is Jesus, Isai, in terms of following Jesus. And if you don't follow Jesus, you're not a Christian. You can wear funny hats, or you can speak in different languages, you can be rich or poor, but the Jesus part is really the defining part. So I think maybe that, but historically, I don't know, Neelima, you're a historian. Do you know when that started? I don't know.
I don't know about Isai. That's very interesting. I mean, I've just always taken it for granted. Isai means Christian. I never thought of it as being just Roman Catholicism or
No,
Protestant.
it's definitely not.
Yeah.
Like, it can't be just Roman Catholic. No.
So
I
yes,
think it would be
it's
the
just
Jesus
Christian.
people.
I think in this context, it just means Christian. But
Yeah,
interesting, Chandni. I shall look it up and see the etymology.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Clooney, Professor
Thank you.
Chitgopikar.
Thank you very much.
So dear audience, if you still have questions, please email those to us at karmaheritage@gmail.com. We'll forward those questions to Professor Chitgopikar or Professor Clooney. So please mention that and we'll get back to you. We are already at the top of the hour, and our speaker and our moderator very kindly extended it by 5-6 minutes. We always end up extending our lectures, even though we only reserved an hour of our speaker's time. But our speakers have always indulged our wishes. So thank you very much, Professor Clooney, for this wonderful and very eye-opening lecture, and Professor Chitgopikar for your comments and for your reflection.
Thank you.
This brings us to the end of the lecture tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We have a Karma workshop special lecture tomorrow with Dr. Ursula Weeks, who will be talking about Sir Elijah Empley's Mughal art collection. That would be for our workshop members only and would be premiered on our YouTube channel in May, followed by a Karma special YouTube lecture by Professor Chitralekha Zucchi on 19th, that is Wednesday. So we'll be back. Till then, please join me in thanking our speaker for tonight, Professor Francis X. Clooney, and our moderator, Professor Neelima Chitgopikar.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good.
Chandni.